Ask the Podcast Coach for May 18th, 2019.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music. That means it's Saturday. It's 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I am the one and only. See, I always forget to do this. I am Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings. Happy Saturday morning to you, Dave. Spring is in full effect. We have thunderstorms rolling through the area, some severe this evening. So wherever you're at, be safe.
That's what I hear. That Tornado Alley is what they said on the news. Tornado Alley is going to wake up this week, and I'm like, oh, that's
it is. We live in that, so that Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and then Iowa, Missouri area. That's kind of Tornado Alley. They were predicting, it's late in the week, like, hey, this weekend's going to be pretty severe. So watch out for tornadoes. So we had some roll through last night. It's clear right now, which is good. So let's get this show in before anything happens.
Well, that's me. It's like they said, and it's perfectly doing, like, the weather guy is perfectly accurate. They said, you're going to wake up tomorrow. It's going to look really awful. It's going to be raining and 50, and it was. And they said, and then it's going to get nice out. And as I record this, you can see where the left side of my face is very bright because I got a ton of sun coming in from this window. And I was like, well, there you go. So, if you want to jump in, we are live right now. AskThePodcastCoach.com/join. We'll bring you in. Or if you're listening on Spreaker, which is where we do the audio live, we are at AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. We do not pay attention to the Spreaker chat. And in case anybody is wondering, speaking of Spreaker, I have no details on the Rob Greenlee /Libsyn thing.
Wow, that was amazing.
Didn't know anything about it. All of a sudden, I get this email and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. By the way, you're going to notice there's a new name up here. Don't say anything till Wednesday, but we would like to welcome Rob Greenlee to Libsyn. And I'm like, wow, okay.
Wow.
So
I was listening to a Spreaker live show,
and
he announced it on the show, sort of in the beginning, and then
but not really.
No, but then he was like, "You'll hear more tomorrow."
Yeah.
So he'd said on Spreaker live show, this was the last show he was doing with Alex for Spreaker live show, but it said no reason why, and then had about a 15 or 20 minute kind of best of reel at the end, which was really interesting, and then. So the next morning I look on Facebook and it's him, saying that he's now a Libsyn employee. And I was like, oh, well, that's why. I guess we know why. Congratulations, Rob, on that move. That's an interesting move. I don't think we've seen among the big four a move like that of an employee of that stature kind of moving around. I don't think that's happened yet.
Yeah. No, the closest one would be Jessica, but that's not, she keeps jumping from podcast marketing companies. Like she had her own thing, and then Jessica Kufferman, and then she joined another podcast advertising company, and now she's with podcast websites. But that's not that Jessica's not a big shot smarty pants, but we're talking VP stuff here.
Yeah, this is a big move. And you're like, I just didn't see that coming for him. Not that it's bad. This is great, but
I love is Monday and Tuesday next week I'm in Pittsburgh, so I will see the gentle giant that is Rob Greenlee in the Libsyn office, and we do have a question in the chat room. Dave, I have a podcast on Podbean. Do you think it's worth to move to Libsyn?
As he asked the Libsyn guy. If you're happy
with your stats.
How many you in too? Like if you're in a bunch and you've got people coming over to your site on Podbean, do you necessarily want to change that? If I guess there's a lot of questions other than just money. They're pretty comparable in price, right? Between the two, between Podbean and Libsyn.
I think Podbean is like
$12.99 or something.
Yeah, it's like, and it always looks cheaper because it's like $9, and you're like asterisk if you buy it by the year.
Yeah.
And it's like $12 where Libsyn is like $15, I think. So
$100 difference a year, I don't think is enough to mess with your feed.
Yeah.
It is for services though, like you mentioned, stats.
Yeah. If you're
Stats
happy with their support, you know, I was, I don't know. I don't want to toot my own horn. I got a really nice email today from somebody that said, look, I've dealt with a lot of companies. You guys are insane.
Yeah.
Cause I was like literally making movies for the guy and showing him exactly what to do. And he goes, I came here blind. I can't believe this. And I was like, all right, this is why I do my job. So that was cool.
I used Podbean as a free service for a while, and it's okay. I mean, I wouldn't compare it to the level you get with Blueberry, Libsyn, and Spreaker for sure. Those are real, and Podbean is too. But
yeah,
you guys, that's your bread and butter. You're a podcast company. You guys are set up to do it that way. Libsyn, and and Blueberry in particular are really nerds about podcasting. If you listen to any of the people that talk about it, that work for them, they're podcast nerds. I mean, you can hear them talk about this IAB, compliance thing, and you're like, I'm falling asleep trying to listen to it. But that's cool, right? They care about what they do. So
if you go to podcastmediahosting.com, you'll see that. But speaking of that, I quit last year. Like every time a new media host came out, I would go make a podcast and test it. I don't do that anymore because I would spend hours testing a system to go, yeah, they're not as good as Libsyn and Blueberry and Podbean and I was like, okay, I just wasted time, and the thing is, I chose not to. I could, if I today said, nope, I'm going to test every system. You can't. Every week there's a new system coming out. So, and I always wonder, like if a new car company came out, are you going to buy that car? When you've had I've had Toyotas for the last 30 years.
But think Tesla though. Like how many people just went and bought Tesla on its way out?
Yeah,
brand new car.
That's true.
Yeah.
There are going to be those early adopters.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, I think there's just a personality that is always kind of wanting to be out on the edge. I think a lot of us podcasters, Dave, you do this. You buy all this stuff because you're testing it for your podcast. So. Yeah.
We did have another question here. Since Spotify bought Anchor, are you still leery about Anchor's survival? Yes, in a word, I will. I actually now have a whatever you would call it, a text expander. If you're happy with giving up access to your stats in Podcast Connect, giving up access to your stats in Stitcher.com, having very basic stats, if you're okay with a company that hasn't made any profit, and it cut it off. Hold on. There's more to that, but basically, no, I'm not happy with Anchor. And here's the thing. This is where, again, weird coming from the Libsyn guy, but I'm not the Libsyn guy. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. See, it said that right at the beginning of the show. There is Whooshka. Whooshka is a free media hosting company that I also don't recommend. Why? Because free is not a good business model. That they don't, they're like a media host. You have to submit your show to Apple and Stitcher manually, but you also retain all the stuff. So, but
I mean, I'm not a Libsyn guy, so let me just say this: as far as Anchor goes, it's so attractive, much like some of the other, SoundCloud and some of the other ones that came out with great marketing, like they're amazing marketing. And when they're bought by Spotify, we still don't know what Spotify is really going to do with them. Yeah. And they could completely wipe it out and start over. So anytime, you have a company that's been acquired, generally not the best time to jump on the bandwagon with a company like that. We could I would let the kind of the dust settle on that acquisition and kind of say, okay, Spotify, not really known as a podcast hosting company. Now I know that they're doing some things to maybe help people generate podcasts and such. And so, but none of that's been announced. Dave, there has been nothing from Spotify on Anchor since they bought them. Zero.
Zero.
We know nothing. So if I was starting today and it was like, hey, what do you think? Well, if you're messing around, give Anchor a shot. It's free. You're in for nothing. You're out for nothing. You have no idea where that thing's going to go. If you're in it for the long haul, you're going to build a network. You're going to really create some podcasts. I do something different. And I'm not the Anchor basher that everybody else is. But it just right now, if you're asking me right now, and would I move to it? Not in a million years. Come on, let's let's call it what it is. Is it a bad service? No. Is it limited? Totally. Dave just read off all those things where it limits you. Is it free? If you've got to do it for free, well, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get that kind of quality. So that would be my non-Libsyn employee take on.
Yeah, they do change the format of your file. They also stop you from receiving email. So the email in your feed goes to oblivion. They're not always forthcoming with their information, meaning, hey, we're going to submit this to Apple for you, is actually meaning, hey, we're going to take away your rights to Apple Stats. Now, if you're happy with all that, by all means, have fun creating your podcast. I just want you to go in with your eyes wide open. We did have a good question here, but we're all on the podcast media hosting.
I love it.
What's Libsyn's policy on Chartable? I see it requires your Libsyn login to track stats there. Per Rob Walsh, that's a hell no. Not a no, that's a hell no. Why would you give your login name and password? And what's weird is I talked to those guys when they first came out. And they're like, no, it's the same encryption that banks use and it's safe. And I'm like, oh, you mean just like Target and all the other big companies that have been hacked? I'm like, And
never give paid.
I'm just like, what company goes, can we have your login name and password? I'm like,
not ever.
I'm helping somebody move their feed today. And they wanted to give me their login name and password. I go, do you have LastPass? And they're like, yes. I go, good. Give me access via. I go, I don't want your login name and password. Randy has one here. Got a buddy with a podcast at C-Suite Radio. I've never even heard of that. And they now incorporate Megaphone for hosting. It takes over what existing hosting C-Suite shows. That is one I know very little of. I know a couple people that have moved there. I've heard it's a little buggy, but again, it's kind of new. I think that's there's a big network that's behind that one.
But the Opportunity Network?
It's like I forget the name of the company. You would hear it though. Okay. It's like my brain is not up this morning. But anyway, so if Dave asks if I change my media hosting companies, do I resubmit? No. Here's what you do. We actually talked about this last week. Here's what you're going to do. First of all, you have to add, like I remember he was talking about that red circle place. I went over and said, do you guys do 301 redirects? Because that's the key. And they said, yeah, we do. And I'm like, okay, great. Now, of course, you have to ask them. So you have to trust that they will. Because like right now, Hipcast is having a hard time. They've had a bad 2 months. And you can ask them to redirect your feed. And they're getting around to it when they feel like it, which is bad. Which is, again, Panoply. Yes, Daniel, Panoply is the network behind Megaphone. Thank you. And now I lost my train of thought. Oh, redirecting the feed. So what you need to do is you go into, let's say we're moving from Podbean to Libsyn. There's a thing in Podbean that says, hey, put your new feed here. That is actually behind the scenes of 301 redirect. And then in Libsyn, you go in and put a thing that says, hey, I'm new. And most hosting companies don't have that ability to go, I'm new. So what happens? Your listener fires up their phone, goes over to the Podbean feed. Podbean says, hey, guess what? They moved. They're over there. Your listener goes over to there, and in their app, it goes, oh, look, they're new. Boom. It updates that app to, in the future, just look at Libsyn. So I would say the 301 redirect is a little bit like a change of address. And that's why, like Hipcast, I have one guy that cannot get Hipcast to redirect his feed. I had another guy this week that was from Korea, and it was awful because I'm trying to help him get their support to redirect his feed. The whole website is in Korean. And I'm like, I can't even tell you, like, here, go to the support page because it's just hieroglyphics to me. But yeah, that's why that 301 redirect is so important, because if you don't get that redirect, because people go, oh, I just went into Apple and changed my feed there. That works from now going forward. So if somebody goes to Apple, subscribes to your show, hey, they're using your new feed. But without the redirect, that means there's no change of address. So that means when the listener goes up and it checks, we'll go back to Podbean. I'm not picking on Podbean, but let's say I was on Podbean and I fire up my app. There's no change of address. It's still looking at that feed. And now it's dead because it's been a month. And you never, you're at you're on Blueberry now. So that's why you need that 301 redirect. Otherwise you lose your audience. And then there's still sticky stuff because there's bad stuff like Google Play Music may or may not recognize the update. You have to go to Spotify to say, hey, Spotify, here's my show. I was using this feed. And usually you have to go through your media host to do that. Like Jason just moved to Spreaker. And so he was on Libsyn and he's got a deal there. And so I had to go to Spotify and say, hey, can you please update Jason's show on Spotify to use the new Spreaker feed? So, yeah, moving your feed on one hand, not a big deal, but you just got to make sure to, have that 301 redirect in place. And then you want to leave it in place according to Apple for 4 weeks. Why? Because not everybody listens to podcasts every day. And so in theory, if you leave it there for 4 weeks, most of your audience should at least fire up their app, because all it has to do is refresh the app and boom, it updates. And anybody that hasn't listened to your show in a month is not a fan. So you may lose some people, but
you think that's true? Is it 30 days? Do you think that's the cutoff for if they haven't listened in 30 days, they've dropped it?
I think it's quicker, but that's because, again, like for me, I would say 2 weeks, but that's because I listen to podcasts every day.
Right. Yeah. I don't think that's the average consumer though, Dave. I think they're way behind. I hear from my listeners all the time that are playing catch up to our stuff or to my stuff. And I don't know if 30, maybe 60 or 90. I don't know. I want to give more benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. But to go back to this question, no. So you don't have to resubmit your show, because what happens is that change of address also updates Apple, which then updates Pocket Casts and Overcast and everything like that. So, and it usually takes about 24 to 48 hours for that to propagate across the internets. So, so it's one of those things. I want to make sure here. Do I initiate the 301 reader, or will a new media host do it? If you're on, it depends. Here's that lovely depends thing. If you're on Podbean, well, first of all, if you move to Libsyn, use the coupon code SOP free to get a free month. Got to get that in there. You can email us and say, hey, here's my RSS feed from Podbean. I would like to migrate to Libsyn. We will pull in all your information for you. If you're using WordPress, we might send you to a tutorial where you can actually install the Libsyn the Libsyn Publisher Hub, and it'll basically do the almost everything for you and put players on your website. That's pretty slick. But there's a thing I keep saying PowerPress in Podbean where you just put your Libsyn feed, but you do that after you've imported it. Because if you redirect it before you import it, when I go to import it, I'm trying to import myself, and you'll go blind doing that. So anyway, I
love this show. This is one of my favorite things to do ever. This is so great.
The chat room is on fire today.
They are. Lots of new folks, it seems like, too.
Yeah, the Starnes family. What do you think about podcasting with a lapel mic? I have a growing show because my content is unique, but when should I upgrade my mic? I'm approaching 1,000 listeners. Jim, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I think if it sounds good, you can buy some lapel mics that are really awful. And so, it's all about sounding good and what's convenient. If you're doing video and you want to go lapel and it sounds good, that's what they do for TV. But you're paying for $1,000 lapel mics. Those are not cheap. The ones they use for television production, they are not cheap. So it all depends on how you feel about your sound. There's a lot of different ways to get good sound. I don't think there is I have to upgrade at a certain level idea unless you sound really terrible now. So if you got to 1,000 listeners and you sound good and you're happy with it, I don't think that the lapel is the next jump up. Mm-hmm. You can get some really good mics like this and spend $600 on them if you want to do it that way. I mean, if you want to spend a lot of money, there's ways to do it. I'm just not sure you have to. So the question I would say is, are you getting feedback that your audio is not good enough? And if you are, okay, then let's talk about what's your setup? What are you doing? What are you comfortable with? How much do you want to spend? If you're not getting that kind of feedback, stay with what you got. I've been podcasting for 10 years and using these ATR 2100s for 7 of them, maybe. And they just keep working. So why upgrade? I could go to a RE320 like you have. I could do a high LPR 40 if Dave is ready on the button.
LPR 40.
we could do that if we wanted to. I just haven't wanted to spend the extra $400 to make the upgrade. You know,
that's the key. If I on my weight loss show, I say, if you're not hungry, food is not the answer. Because a lot of times you're bored or thirsty. So if your audience isn't saying you sound kind of thin or whatever, or if it just sounds bad, you know,
they always do a mic shootout at Podcast Movement. So that if you wanted to try a whole bunch of different mics, that would be an opportunity to come in and hear how you sound. I sound different and you sound different, Dave, on different mics because of the frequency at which we speak. Yeah. So it's a good idea to kind of try some out. But again, I don't think there's a point where unless it makes you feel better. This, and I think this is kind of underrated or undervalued. If you get on a big person's mic, like, you know, you go out and you buy a Heil PR40 and it makes you feel confident.
I'm sorry, you said it.
I did. Thank you. If it makes you feel confident and a better podcaster, I think it's worth it. Like even if it didn't change the sound that much, if you're you know having that big shot smarty pants mic in front of you, I think that can be worth it.
I think for me, that's the key. And I didn't understand this until in Florida, when I played somebody else's guitar, and I didn't feel as good because I didn't like the way I sounded. So if you don't like the way you sound and you would feel a little more confident, then that's when I think you would switch. Michael had an interesting question. How often should you switch website hosts? Never. Yeah. Unless you really, I mean, I was on HostGator for 15 years, probably. Because that was like my first person that I started doing with. They had great support, great price, and then they just started to suck. Yeah. And after about 2 years of just, I went, all right. And then I'm like, right now I moved to SiteGround, and I found that SiteGround is great the first year. And then the second year they go, oh, by the way, it's like $400 a year. So I'm getting ready to move a bunch of I'm going to keep on them, but I'm going to put a bunch of websites on one account. And this is where Jim can talk about Maple Grove Partners.
Yeah, well, I mean, we used Maple Grove Partners as a self-hosting tool, right. And he's optimized it for WordPress and podcasters. Nice. Right? I don't want to pimp that here. I mean, I can maplegrovepartners.com, but don't change them unless there's something wrong. Like, you know, like Dave, you said, it's cost too much. They jack the prices up. You're not getting good service. There's plenty of host opportunities that are out there. Trust me. I think web hosting now has gotten to be, I mean, Christian over at Maple Grove, he charges $10 a month. Like, I think it's a commodity at this point for the most part, right? It's everywhere you go, you should be paying somewhere from $10 to $15 a month to get pretty good web service. If you're not, then maybe it's time to change. But I don't think it's one of those kinds of things. It's gotten such a utility. I don't think it's gotten to the point where you should be flip-flopping. It's kind of hard to, like, you're going to do some work to move your stuff, right, Dave?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things. It's even with something like managed WP, it's still weird. And that means typically your website's going to be down for a day or two as things again propagate. So,
before you ask that, I mean, Daniel says in the chat room who's about to migrate to Flywheel. Their performance is fantastic. Now, so Flywheel's an Omaha company, which is super cool. I know those guys over there at Flywheel. Nice. They are growing like crazy. They're moving into a new building. They do some incredible stuff. They also are WordPress optimized, which means that's almost all they do is WordPress. They know it in and out. They have amazing hardware. They're doing some great stuff with the cloud. It's $100 a month. Like, this is enterprise grade. Yeah. Like they're really designed for people who are making money, right? And you got to spend money to make money sometimes. Yeah. And they have some great stuff. So sorry about that. Go ahead with the question.
Oh, that's all right. Another question here says, I'm a 99% newbie on podcasting. Do you have any materials or courses for newbies? Any sites with tutorials? I would stay away, and this, I love Pat Flynn to death. Be very, very careful. He has a tutorial on YouTube that has really, really bad advice. So if you're watching Pat Flynn, he starts mentioning FeedBurner, run, do not walk away from that. You can go to schoolofpodcasting.com/baby steps. And I send you a video a day that talks about what do I need? What's this? What is an RSS feed? It kind of walks you through some of the real basic stuff. And then there's also this thing called, I hear about it all the time. Oh, that's right. The schoolofpodcasting.com, where you can use the coupon code listener and save 20% off. So that's
super worth it, Dave. I listen to everything you do. Besides doing this on Saturday mornings with you, I listen to School Podcasting every single week. and I hear the feedback that I get from the folks that work with you. And it's amazing to me the work that you do and how giving you are for this. So if you're thinking about doing this new, I don't think it's wrong to pimp your own. That's why we do this, right? So don't be ashamed of that, or don't shy away from it. Check Dave's stuff out. He's got a lot of stuff to get started. Not only back episodes of this show, but back episodes of School of Podcasting and some back episodes of Podcasters Roundtable, which it's got some great info on it as well.
Yeah, that's the roundtable is always a lot of fun. You know, the show I've been listening to lately, here's the thing I love about it. And this is one of those things where Dave in the future is going to repeat this on the School of Podcasting, because I'm nibbling at this idea, but it's something I noticed because I read this book called Primal Branding, and he talks about one of the keys of a brand or a community. And this, once you read it, you kind of go, well, duh, but communities / brands share a belief. And I went, that's, and so to do that, so like, but let me get to my main point. Bandrew over at Podcastage does Bandrew Says. I love this show because it's news about YouTube and podcasting and the internet. And he's snarky. So he tries to be neutral, but he can't, although he does a really, really good job of being almost 100% neutral. And I love the fact that he shares his opinion. And to me, I went, here's a guy that's not, and that's scary to share your opinion. But I was like, yeah, that makes sense. When you share what you believe, then other people who believe like you do will go, yeah, this guy's on my team, or this woman's on my team. And then the people that don't like you will go, oh, this guy's an idiot. And then they'll listen to every week because they want to go, see, he's still an idiot. So it's the book itself. To me, I think I'm a victim of overhype. I've heard so many people talk about primal branding that when I read it, there's a lot of it that's just like, hey, these people do this and they do that. And I'm like, okay, but can we go back to because there's like 7 factors of primal branding. And by the end of it, I was like, wait, are we still talking about the 7 items? Because now you're just telling me about this yogurt company. And I'm like, I don't quite get it.
You have to be careful with those kinds of books. Jim Collins, not me, but Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great back, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever that was. And he outlines, 20 companies in that book that, this is what is your company. This is what you need to do. You know that 10 of those companies, I'm making that number up, it's a bunch of them, have since imploded on themselves. And so in the moment when people are having success, you could look at John Lee Dumas or Pat Flynn and say, oh, if I just reverse engineer what they're doing, Dave, there was a time you were posting your financial report online like those guys were, right?
Yeah.
We try to reverse engineer their success, and what worked for them does not necessarily work for you. So
that's the other thing.
I get a little hesitant about books that are like, oh, we're reverse engineering success, and these companies were successful because they did this. Apple was not successful the first go around, right? And they had to get bailed out by Microsoft. So like we forget these things that, Apple, Steve Jobs, you got to be a complete douchebag to the CEO to be successful. Not true, by the way, not true. And it doesn't always guarantee success. So I always, you are good at saying this, Dave, is you got to find your own path. Take some things that people have done, learn from them, but blaze your own trail. Figure out what's successful for you. There was a question in the chat room about, I've had a guest cancel twice on me.
Yeah.
Right. How many times is enough before? Because my time is valuable. I don't know. How bad do you want this guest? How valuable are they to you? If they're not, ditch it and run. But there's no number. Like there's no okay, 3 times and you're out. It's like, no. How bad do you want the guest?
Yeah, that's the other thing too. I have found, and I use Acuity scheduling, and it emails you, I think, the day before, the day of, and then an hour before. So if I get somebody goes, oh, I didn't know about it, I'm like, I'm very tempted to hold up parts of my hand that are nasty.
Yeah, well, it's not always on purpose, though.
Yeah.
Right? It's not always on purpose. Sometimes
Well,
things
no.
just get away from people. The most talented people I've ever interviewed or I've ever worked with are the worst at trying to pin them down for things. They're so incredibly successful. They've overcommitted to everything, and you just can't get them in. Do you want them or don't you? And if you do want them,
yeah,
you know,
I'm with you. I give somebody 2 strikes. Because everybody had, I mean, I've just straight up forgotten about stuff. And all of a sudden you look down, you're like, oh crap, I'm supposed to be on an interview right now. Yeah. So I give everybody the, okay, you get a mulligan, but after 2, I'm like, unless it involved a hospital or a death or, family, children, emergencies. If it's just like, oh dude, I'm so sorry. I'm like, yeah. And then it goes back to what you said. How bad do you want the guest?
How hard is it though? Just to have them reschedule. Be like, okay, no big deal.
That's true too.
I'll tell you what, go reschedule. And we'll get this thing figured out. I've had some where eventually they just either they drop off or you get it done. And I don't know if it's worth, again, I know your time is valuable. It's maybe not that valuable. So you're kind of like, hey, look, if they're being disrespectful, if they're just not showing up, well, then maybe, okay, yeah, just cut them loose. But yeah, maybe not. I mean,
yeah. I usually... I'm pretty lenient with that because I will, if it's like, first of all, most people show up a little early. Like I'll like 2 till 7. If the interview's at 7, I'll get a thing on my, like, your attendees are waiting. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I usually know by 5 after, I'm like, uh-oh. And then especially for me, even though Acuity Scheduling is doing it for me, I still will email people the day of. And if I don't get a reply back, because I'll say like, hey, this is Dave, just double checking we're still on for tonight, right? And if I don't get that back and it's like now 5 after 7, I pretty much know they're not coming, because they've had, 10 hours to get back to me or whatever. They haven't forgot about it. And so I usually know. And so that for me, I'll just go, well, let's start typing show notes or whatever. But if there's something, if it stops me from doing something else because I have to sit here, or if there's, you know what I mean? There's no other way to like, all right, I'll fill in the time doing this. So I'm still productive, even though I'm not doing the interview. What stinks is if you have a schedule. Okay, so, Jim's going to be on this week, then Daniel's going to be on next, and then Miss Eileen's that. And all of a sudden, Daniel, whatever, was in a car wreck. You're like, oh, now what do I do for that? And that's the tricky part.
That's a totally different, it's a great use case, by the way, of where you're counting on them. Which means, well, okay. Are you really, if you're counting on them for that, are you really booking guests that you don't know very well to be on there, right? So if you don't know them very well, if you don't have their text number, chances are it could be a little sketchy to begin with. You might want to have a backup associated with that. So just having something in the can, good to have it anyways, just in case. If you're running your schedule that tight where it's week to week and you can't recover from that, well, you probably need to have a backup in the can ready, something, or get ready to do a solo podcast, get on there and do something solo.
Yeah. Which will in some cases make people wet their pants.
It's not as hard as it sounds though. You just got to get out there. It's like the very first time you podcasted, you just got to get out there and start doing it. The more you do it, the better. I was very hesitant because I've always been a guest guy. And the first couple of times I did it, and I asked the audience, like, hey, give me some feedback. And they were brutal. But they did give me some feedback. And it was like, okay, you could try this and that. And this was okay. And one guy even said, yeah, your cadence sounded pretty normal. And so I wouldn't know unless I tried. So that's one of those kinds of things. I think you need to be gracious in this area and give people the benefit of the doubt. Let them, something happened, something was going on, something was happening that they had to miss it for a good reason. I think you should assume that every time until you hear otherwise, because otherwise you start getting angry and bitter.
That's it.
And that's no fun. That's just no fun.
You know who I'm never angry or bitter at?
Maybe our awesome subscribers.
Our awesome supporters. Yeah. If you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, you can be the teacher's pet. I really need to promote this, but this is where you get a monthly meeting with me at a deeply discounted rate. So if you're looking for like a mentorship where you meet with me once a month, plus we also have the There's once a month now where we get together and do just, it's kind of like Ask the Podcast Coach, except it's private. But these are the people that give us $20 a week. Awesome people like Greg over at debtshepherd.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. I saw this morning on Facebook Live. He was doing someplace. He's like combined with another podcaster doing live stuff, and they're driving all around Florida, having a great time. Josh Rivers over at podcastingexperiments.com. Max Trescott up in the air at aviationnewstalk.com. Shane from spybrary.com. Carrie Bond over at keywestperspective.com/podcast, and also live in the chat room as we speak. My buddy Ronsley over at Amplify Media Group. You can find him at mustamplify.com. Carl White down in Life in the Carolinas podcast.com. That's Carolinas with an S. And last but not least, Kim Craggy over at Toastmasters101.net. If you would like to be an awesome supporter, simply go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And we would love to have you. So thank you to all our supporters. Any questions while I was away?
Did we talk about Audioburst last week or 2 weeks ago? I don't know how. I thought we talked about this on this show because this is how I came up with it. So remember Clamor?
Yes.
We have kind of a Clamor-like service called Audioburst. So go to audioburst.com. Don't get that confused with Audio Mix or Audio Mac or any of those. Audioburst.com. And a kind of a new service. The company has been around for a couple years, but they are kind of launching the service where you can tie in your RSS feed to them. When you produce a new show, they'll consume it, and then they'll do AI-based. I'm kind of questioning that, but AI-based transcripts for you. And then they're attempting to break it down into little chunks as well. You know, these little 5 or 7 minute chunks of the show with some transcripts. One of the cool things about it is when you play the transcript or when you play the episode, transcript comes in below it and it follows you on the transcript. Now, it's still early. Like they don't have a beta tag on here, but it should have an alpha tag. It's still really, really new. I can't update some of the pictures. I can't update any of the transcriptions that they do. I can't. There's a lot of things I can't do yet. What's been amazing is we've been looking at this service a little bit because I love the transcription based stuff they're trying to do. I love the idea of what they're trying to do. Whether they're going to be able to implement it or not will be a different story. But one of my interns contacted them. I've ingested some Gallup stuff because it's really, really important that we get some solid transcripts, and I do it in a way I could pay somebody to do it, but we should be able to do this today with technology, right? And they got right back to her, which is pretty great. There's a little feedback button, and she clicked it and she typed it, and within 30 minutes they were like, "Hey, yeah, we appreciate this feedback." So. Kind of interesting. I think not ready for prime time. I wouldn't be using this for podcasting. I mean, but if you're looking for transcripts, if you kind of want to stay on the edge of what's going on around transcripts and what's going on around these ideas of pulling out meaningful content, this is an interesting service. For right now, it's free. They haven't even announced any pricing associated with it. But
yeah, I haven't even heard about it. But
yeah.
Speaking of transcripts, I was amazed at. I wish I could remember the name of the stupid thing with Alex Bloomberg this morning. I was watching some sort of live class, learn class, something. It's like master class, but it's not. It's something live. Anyway, with Alex Bloomberg from Gimlet talking about storytelling, and they have a transcript of it. And I was amazed that the transcript was horrible. Like it hadn't been like, well, what it did, I was surprised because the idea is you're going to read it. And Alex is not gifted when it comes to speaking without a script. He's not horrible. He talks like a normal person, but there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. And they had but, and like, really? Like, you're not going to clean up the transcript? And at one point he says, Esprit Devora, Creative Live. Thank you, Miss Eileen. And Esprit Devora is in the front row, and she asks the question, and Alex says, well, what do you think about that, Esprit? And I don't know what they put for her name, but I'm like, if somebody had actually watched the video, it was in a giant "my name is" tag, and I'm like, So I thought that was
Well,
transcripts have a way to go.
They're hard. In one of the ones I did, my co-host, her name is Micah, Maika. It's hard to pronounce and spell, and they translated it as IKEA, which is great.
Nice.
Microsoft is doing some work. One of the things I actually think Microsoft on their Azure platform, that's their cloud services platform, has this video editor tool, which is really, really cool. And in the background, they're doing transcriptions for you, and you can add a text file that will help the machine do the learning on what you're saying. So like when I say I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup studios, this is Gallup's Call to Coach recorded on, I say that all the time, right? They never translate that right. And when I fed them that sentence in the order it was, the machine picked up on it and said, oh, when I'm struggling to translate this, I can use this language to help me. And it got it right. So super cool. Like there's some great things coming with transcriptions, especially if we help with the machine learning aspect of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we put out a whole poll on our Facebook group starting yesterday, and I've gotten 50 comments already about how does my audience feel about the difference between transcriptions and closed caption? What do they see the difference in them being, and what's their tolerance for errors? Because this is the key. Like if they have a high tolerance for errors, I can get away with a sketchy transcriptions as long as they're kind of close, right? In real time, of course, we speak differently than we write. Yeah. And so when you're talking closed captions, typically those would be available in real time below here or a slight delay, right? Those, like I just said, right. I would never say that in and of a sentence that I was writing, but it would show up. Yeah. Do we want to include that in the transcription or not? Right. And so we've begun this debate with the listeners to say, what's your tolerance for it? I think this is the wild, wild west on podcasting right now, because once somebody gets this figured out and they figure out how to crawl that and how they get to it and index it, it's going to make finding things within audio a whole lot easier. By the way, Google's working on this on the backside. They're not releasing anything that they're doing. Right. They're working on it on their own to be able to index this so they can sell you things through the audio. Don't think that's not coming.
Yep. Here's another question. My podcast will not be monetized. It's part of a bigger program on Facebook and YouTube. My earnings will come from lectures and books related to my brand. Any advice? Here's the big one. If you don't let your audience know you have books and you're a speaker, I hear we've had people on the podcast review show, and on that show, we ask, like, what is the goal of the podcast? And somebody will say, I want to get speaking gigs. Never anywhere in the episode do they say, oh, by the way, I'm available for speaking. And you don't have to make it a giant commercial. You could say, like, I was speaking to a bunch of high schoolers last week in Idaho, and one of them came up and asked this question. Okay, now that's all you have to do. Now people know you speak. So yeah, I'm amazed. I see it a lot where people go, oh, I want my podcast to do this. And you listen to it, you're like, how am I supposed to get that from your content? Any other ideas, Jim?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think you've got to continue to always be thinking in the eyes of your listeners. What are they expecting? What do you think? Because we get kind of wrapped up in our own stuff and we kind of lose sight of that. You always have to kind of be thinking, what are they hearing? What do you think they're thinking? What do you think? It's like, somebody had said in the chat room just a few minutes ago, we were back to that conversation about being late. I think Carrie had said, like, I hate it when people are late to my meetings. Like, I don't tolerate, that's not what she said, but I don't tolerate that at all. And just the other day I was at work and a gal came by who had completely missed a meeting that I had put on. And then she came in, I saw a couple hours later, and she came by and she says, oh, hey, I just witnessed this terrible accident this morning on my way in where a guy flew in front of me and hit the median. And and you're like, so you don't necessarily know what's going on in people's lives when these things are happening. Likely you don't know what's going on when you get that email from a listener that's a little angry with you, like maybe, or you read it angry. Like, you got to try, and I'm terrible at this. This is so physician heal thyself. You have to kind of take it. I think you got to take these things a little more positive to start with, or assume positive, or assume something was happening in their life that they didn't have any control over. Yeah. Anytime I get a troll, that's one of your, like, when you're like, you're just ready to, like, well, I'll tell you. And I'm like, hold on. And many moons ago at this point, I was in classes to be a pastor, and they said, look, if you see somebody sleeping in church,
don't forget that could be a new parent who's got an 8-month-old or a 3-month-old or a 6-week-old that's they've been up all night. So
hey, let me say one more thing before we move on. Been trying this new thing, this new revolutionary, read it in a book. I've heard about it before, this new idea of actually sleeping. So
what?
Yeah, I know. So I got really convicted. I was listening to who was I listening to? Oh, a guy I follow on crypto, and he'd stopped. By the way, he hadn't produced a podcast in 9 months. He was still in my list, and it popped up when he came back. Right. So people don't always, just because you're gone for a week or you miss a week doesn't mean people unsubscribe. Like, it was subscribed. I've been subscribed to him for the last 9 months. Right. And it popped up. All right. So side story. So Carter comes back, and he said, he does this long presentation. Then he says, he's talking about sleep. And I I get super convicted about it because I run on like 5 or 6 hours of sleep. So this week I'm like, you know what? Solid 8. I'm going to put myself to bed. I'm going to set the alarm. So I'm making sure I'm getting 8 hours sleep. Dave, it is amazing what a little bit of sleep does. If you're running your schedule a little tight, if you're a little grumpy, if you're being irritable with people, if you're saying things you shouldn't be saying, and you're sleep deprived, like that could be the problem. I mean, you could be a douche, but you also could be sleep deprived in the process. So it's like, I think as podcasters, because we're on all the time and we're being recorded, it might be important. Like, I think our best work is
my goal is 7 hours, and so I actually listen when the woman in the tube tells me at 10 till at 11:15 start getting ready for bed. I do, and I'm in bed by midnight, and I get up at 7:30 or 7. So,
do you feel good? I mean, do you feel rested?
I do. Yeah, I'm getting more done. And so I
was getting to the point by the end of the day where I was like, I don't want to write show notes. Like, I'm not going to do it. Well, okay, that's because you're tired.
Right.
This week I was like, man, I can't. Like, I'm anxious to get to the show notes. I'm I wouldn't say I'm excited about it, but at least I'm not tired. So
yeah. Jim's getting ready to do the show notes.
Whoa!
That's Jim right there.
Said by no one ever, by the way. No one ever.
We got another question from the chat room here. When I do my solo podcast, I do the first take live in my Patreon Facebook group. There's usually a brain or two. I think anyway, he has a few brain farts in there. So I generally end up re-recording it, but it's been a good exercise. Absolutely. What I do, and I swapped this out. I used to record my show and off of like 4 or 5 bullet points. And then as I'm listening to it, after I've edited it and I'm uploading it, I used to type out the show notes. And inevitably, I would find something in the show notes as I'm typing them up. I'm like, oh, I should have said this. So now I type out my full blog post, flush out the idea, and then pull out 5 bullet points and record the podcast. Now, that's my workflow. That doesn't mean you have to do that. Some people will write out, like they'll actually type out a script, and that's fine. As Jim said earlier, you don't write like you talk, and you don't talk like you write. So when you write it, write like you talk so that you don't have to do anything weird like that. But
Mike Murphy is really good at that. If you've ever listened to any of Mike Murphy's stuff, he writes it out. It's 100% written out, and he reads it, but he reads it like it's, I don't know, it's a comfortable pace to listen to it. It's not like he's reading. It's all done when he gets there. We create for Home Gadget Geeks, we create the show notes through the week, and then I kind of clean them up as I go. And so they're almost show ready. All I have to do is write a synopsis. So I write a little, hey, Jim and Mike talked about whatever. And then, so that makes the, I still hate doing them, but it still makes the process, that and a little sleep makes the process a whole bunch easier.
Exactly. We have a lot of people still on transcripts in the chat room here. The Audioburst transcripts appear to be quite a bit of editing, and Bang's Naughty Bit says, yeah, even if it's 95% accurate, that means 1 in 20 words are wrong. And yeah, I have yet, unless the only one I've come close, and it's like $1 or something a minute, is Rev, because there's an actual person typing it up. Any kind of AI, whether it's otter.ai or Temi or all those things, it's, and then Bang says transcription makes it easy to do the bad things to podcast. Wait,
I don't understand that.
I don't know. I think he's saying it's, I think it was Daniel said transcriptions are the lazy podcaster's way of doing show notes. And I'm
well,
like,
if it's only transcriptions, that I think that can be true. There has been some discussion about, taking the audio transcriptions from a mediocre service and making them a part of your show notes helps Google, like at the end, helps the Google engine kind of crawl those for keywords. I don't think that's true now, because I think Google is looking for more natural sentences that actually make sense and not just a whole bunch of words. If the transcription's really bad and you're having trouble reading it, chances the crawler won't understand it either. And you could even get penalized if it's because they're looking for keyword stuffing on your page. And if it looks that way to the crawler, it will penalize your page. So you got to be careful about just copy and pasting a poorly done transcript into your show notes. But I know that got real popular. There's a whole bunch of podcasters talking about that for a long time.
Yeah. Here's you ready for I wish I had a jingle for this. Here, we'll just do smooth jazz. It's time for Dave's embarrassing moment.
Ooh, I like it.
You ready?
I like it. Go.
Bangs asked in the chat room, Dave, how's your Samson swing arm holding up? And the answer is it's still sitting on the floor next to me. How long does it take to install this? I don't know. Maybe 8 seconds. And I actually have a bunch of things for my office. I bought a cool thing that I'm going to now be able to take my, these things, the monitors off the desk, give me more desk space.
Good.
And I actually bought a second monitor because the one I have here doesn't have the cool little 4-claw thingy that lets so my answer is it's working great on the floor. It hasn't broken or anything like that, but I have not,
let monitors be your friend by now. Yeah, by the way, if you're struggling, I see this in pictures all the time where podcasters, they love their laptops. Like, love me some laptops. And I've got this big microphone and this big mixer and this little tiny laptop, and you're like, hey, let a monitor be your friend. Right now, you could, for $179, you can get a 24-inch Dell, whatever you want. Fill in the blanks. Pretty great monitor. Those stands the arms that you bought, $65-$70 maybe for
39.
Yeah, super cheap right now. You get what you pay for. But but that being said, still use your laptop, but let the production space kind of expand out for you. It's a lot like getting sleep. You just feel a whole lot better when you've got all this monitor space to be able to work with, and you're not trying to edit on that little tiny laptop, that little tiny screen. So stop doing that. Stop sending me pictures of it. It drives me nuts.
I bought some stuff to help my desk my whole office area. That was the whole plan. And Jim, does this work if we do this?
Yes. Yes.
I'm trying to, can you guys see the camera? Yeah, there's a camera.
Yep.
And then up here, Dave, up is down. Here is an actual little light thingy. I'm awful at this.
It's one of those. It's okay. It's one of those round donut lights, right?
Yeah. Why can I not? Right up is down.
It worked.
It worked in the morning. Yeah. But anyway, it's a little clamp, much like the microphone clamp. This one actually did clamp on, but it's got a USB. Well, here you'll see the reflection in the. If I turn this on, there we go. See, there's that little. That's what it looks like, and it now makes me,
It did give you. It added a little color to you.
Well, yeah, it might even out the fact that I've got all tons of light coming in. Yeah, there's actually light now on the side of my face. Yeah. But it's got a thing now where, because you might notice that the camera angle is a little different. So I could actually now, do this and let's look up Dave's nose, kind of thing. Because I thought about it. The original idea was I wanted to put this in front of Jim. So instead of me, I would be looking like this now, but I'd be looking at Jim, except the camera would be in my way. But I thought, well, let's try that. So, and this was another thing. It was like, I don't know, $24. And I was like, oh, if I get this up and get these off the thing, and then I'll be able to, So it just, all I need now is the time to put it together. So
you got to be careful with those donut rings. Okay. Cause this is what happens. I've noticed it got real popular. A lot of makeup podcasters and even some reviewers were doing them. Now you can't see my eyes because for some reason I have really squinty eyes. You can't see mine, but some people you can really see in their eyes. You'll see that circle in their retina around in their eyes, and it makes them look really freaky. So you have to know if you're going to use that, if you're going to use those circle things, and you're going to do it dead on. So in other words, you got the camera in the middle and you got the light coming out, or you're just going to use that. If that light is dead on, it will reflect right back into the camera. So if you're using the circles, I recommend you get them up and down or over and down on you. And I would use 2, not 1. And that'll help kind of balance out the light piece. It's always better, by the way, to have 2 light sources coming from either side than one light source coming directly on.
Which is actually, if I could find the button, which is what this is doing. Yeah. So that's I have 2 box lights out there and that whole 9 yards.
I should have took a picture of this last Saturday.
Wow, that's fun.
Whoa, that's interesting. Last Saturday, I was out at our local junior college, and they Metro Community College. They were shooting a television commercial for their fall enrollment stuff. And they had, Dave, the most gigantic reflector in there. Like, I swear it was probably 30 by 30 feet hanging off the ceiling, and they were shining lights on it. And it was diffusing that light all throughout the room. And I thought, that is the coolest light setup I have ever seen ever. It was super great. So podcasters don't need that. You probably don't need it either.
This doesn't work. I thought it would, but I'm trying it. You're looking at my Trello board. It says, "Hey friends, my podcast is only 3 episodes in. I've been marketing utilizing Facebook and word of mouth, but I'm curious, how long can it take for a podcast to really gain traction? I understand it all depends on content and quality, and if we're giving our listeners what they want, I guess I'm just worried my baby project flopping." And this is from Erica out in a Facebook that I can't remember which Facebook group it was, but so I don't know. When I read that, I was kind of like somewhat worried because they're 3 episodes in and they're already kind of worried about flopping. And I was like, I guess it depends on going back to why are you doing your podcast? And if it's to have fun, are you having fun? Yes. Well, then congratulations. Your podcast is a success. I don't know. I get so worried. I fell into this trap this week of comparing myself to others. But it wasn't in podcasting. I had somebody at Libsyn. In fact, here.
And now it's time for a power rant.
I had somebody contact me at Libsyn, and it said, I'm working with a consultant, blah, blah, blah. And they told me to blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, what? Like, they were actually kind of advising them to be on Libsyn and Blueberry and like have multiple media hosts. And I was like, so I took the person's name and put in consultant's name, first, last podcast. And of course, there wasn't one. And I'm like, so you're taking podcasting, advice from someone who doesn't have a podcast. So if you saw my post on Facebook that said, I wouldn't hire a jockey who didn't have a horse. I wouldn't hire that's what inspired that.
A flight instructor who doesn't have a pilot's license.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just like, so yeah. I fell into that trap of kind of like, how is this person getting clients? And I'm like, but again, this is where you don't know, these people might be bestest buddies or friends or whatever and things like that.
Yeah, I think you got to take the benefit of the doubt, right? On that one, maybe.
Yeah. So when you're 3 episodes in, now is not the time to start comparing yourself to others. At any stage of the game, comparing yourself to others usually does not result in a good mental state. Unless you're much more mature than I am.
Even in most cases, Hollywood gives it 7 episodes before they cancel it. So, yeah. I mean, if we're they're the pros, they're good at this. They know the numbers. By the way, do you know how many flops Hollywood produces every year on shows that never make it out of the first season? Like, and these are pros. These are people who do this for a living. These are people who spent a ton of money to do this, and they're still terrible. If you get into your show and it's 12 episodes and you don't like it, stop doing it. Like, if and nobody's listening to it, if you get into it and you really like it and you're really enjoying it, who cares? Just keep going. If you keep doing it. We just, a couple weeks ago crossed over 400, and I kept thinking, wow, why do I keep, Dave, you're at 600, right? On School of Podcasting.
Yeah.
Why do we keep doing this? Because you like to do it. Yeah. You wouldn't do it for 600 if you are your numbers gigantic on School of Podcasting. No, because they can't be. You're in a hyper niche. You're talking about podcasting about podcasters. It's a hyper niche. My numbers on Gallup, we're maybe at 2,000 or 3,000, right? And you'd think that, boy, that's not the planet. Well, okay, but we're talking about strengths and we're talking about Clifton strengths, and it's a super hyper niche.
Yeah.
So I don't expect gigantic numbers, and I love doing it, and it sells a lot of things. So, you got to kind of, it's more than just the download numbers that you get. I know you hate this word, and I kind of hate it too, but it is about influence. And so you have to kind of say, why am I doing this? And what am I influencing? Is that doing its job, regardless of your downloads? Am I being an influencer, or am I getting what I want out of this?
Absolutely. As we start to fade in the music here.
Oh yeah. Post show.
It's that time already. Here we're going to do something different, and I'll explain why in the post show. Jim, what was your last episode about?
Just the one I just produced this week?
Yeah, not the one coming, but the one last week.
Yeah,
it's already available.
It will be here in a couple hours.
Okay.
It's listener email grab bag. So, hey, we pulled some emails out and kind of worked through our listeners' emails and answered their questions, primarily about home automation.
Awesome. And my last episode, I interviewed one of the founders of Podcoin and kind of went, hey, what's the deal with this? You're paying people to listen to podcasts. Is that really a business model? What's going on? And you can hear that over at, of course, schoolofpodcasting.com. You can find Jim, of course, all things Jim at theaverageguy.tv. You can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. And we are here every week at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Next week, hate to say this because I know we just missed last week. No show next week because Dave is going to Georgia to it's the whole #family first. My cousin's oldest kid is graduating from high school, and my brother said, hey, we'll be back by Monday. He goes, you're not working Monday, all right? I'm like, no. And he goes, why don't we go down there and hang out with the family? And I'm like, not a bad idea. So but that means no show next week. So
super great. It's my birthday next week, so it's good.
There you
We're taking
go.
it off for my birthday.
That's it. That's the reason why.
Nice.
So stick around for some post show. We'll be happy to answer your questions in just a bit.